So welcome to our study. If somebody could just confirm that the sound is all right, if you can actually hear me, that's always useful. Great. Okay. So so welcome again to our study of the Sword of Wisdom, Jakob Leschly. And I've mentioned it before, but this is a text that's studied a lot in the context of those who wish to understand what we're doing in Buddhism. There is a fair bit of theory, and this is because what we're looking at in the Buddhist teaching is very different from the way that we ordinarily understand the world. We're looking beyond the appearances, so that's where we're encouraged to think critically and not accept just the standard set of beliefs that we might sort of incur through our education, and also habitually just in our ordinary deluded condition, which is the entire foundation of the Buddhist teaching, is really recognizing that we've sort of gone astray in the sense of we're just confused. It's not that anybody's bad, and it's not that we're subscribing to the wrong set of dogmas, but it's simply just that we're confused. We're out of it. We've lost track, and that's where the fundamental disposition that from which we operate, which is a sense of me, as opposed to what we then perceive as an other, a field of perceptions which we think of as others, that generates a very confused way of experiencing the world, which essentially continually is a circle of confusion and pain. So what we're doing on the path is extracting ourselves from this pain and also understanding where the pain and the confusion comes from. And that's where we, in the Buddhist teaching, we develop wisdom on the basis of what we call three prajnas, or three wisdoms. First, hearing what the Buddha has to say, an awakened one who is no longer confused. And secondly, thinking critically about what it is and how this connects with our personal experience. And then once we understand that, then we discontinue the confused practice, which is then the practice of familiarizing ourselves with a condition that is free from suffering. And that's the practice of meditation. So in this way, we're expanding our horizons. We're trying to understand things that we ordinarily wouldn't understand, and not intellectually, but experientially. We need to have first someone who tells us that that snake is actually a rope. And particularly what we're going to be looking at today is really important in terms of us who are practicing the path, particularly the Vajrayana path, the practice of the four empowerments and so on. So this is information that's going to be very helpful for those that are sadhakas, practitioners of sadhana, and even for those who are engaging or considering to engage in the Vajrayana view and practice. So we'll begin with invoking the wisdom body of Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche. Through the blessings of awareness, emptiness, Manjushri Kumara, you open the expanse of wisdom and its 8 minds of confidence, thus mastering the vast treasuries of transmission and realization. Mipham Manjushri Gosha, I supplicate you. So, I'm going to backtrack slightly and mainly just focus on one particular section that we're looking at today, which is very significant, which is what we're calling the conventional ultimate valid cognition. And that's the way in which we experience our ordinary world, the world of appearances, and also the realization of what is actually the nature of our entire experience, including all the perceptions that we have. So one is the way that things appear, and the other is the way how things actually are. And of course, we all have different ways of seeing the world. We all see things from our own particular angle. On one hand, seeing things from our particular angle means that it's infused with our particular, you could say, agendas. But it's also simply how we just are seeing things. Right now, I'm looking into a computer screen, and you're looking into a computer screen. We're seeing very different things. We live in different places. We have different experiences, and all of these, they are various perceptions, and they're all true on a conventional sense, because that's the truth we operate with. We each sit in our particular apartments, houses, or whatever, and we need to relate to that, pay the rent, pay the mortgage, maintain the place, and so forth. So we're all operating within a realm that is true, but it's relative to who we are. It's a conventional or relative perspective that we each carry with us. Ultimate, and that's where we talk about it as truth. We talk about it as it's a valid way of understanding things. It's not going to help if you tell your landlord that all phenomena are shunyata. He's still going to want the rent. so we still have to pay taxes, and we still have to eat and sleep and so forth. Now, ultimate valid cognition is understanding that as much as we have all these perceptions, these are perceptions that are generated on the basis of us imputing particular values on what we're seeing. We think of things in a particular way as solid. We think of things as existing in particular ways. And that's where ultimate valid cognition is actually, we go in, we actually look at what we are perceiving, and does it have any ultimate reality? Does it really exist? And that's where Buddhism and physics, for that matter, modern science, actually agree that there is actually nothing there, that when you really investigate, there's ways in which we can relate to these phenomena in terms of referring to particles and so forth, but these are really just place markers. They're really just ways of explaining the way that phenomena and perceptions unfold. Even modern physics will acknowledge there is actually not really anything that we can speak about. Perhaps energy, we can talk about various ways in which these phenomena unfold, but also we understand that they unfold very much on the basis of the subjective. And there's substantial research within modern quantum physics, quantum mechanics, that actually assert that there is nothing out there that is not constructed on the basis of a subject. So in this way, there's an agreement once we begin to analyze that things don't exist the way they appear. And that's where we become a little bit wiser, because unless we actually analyze, then we are very attached and very held by what we perceive. We can like things, we can dislike things. So that's where the sage, someone who is wise, somebody who analyzes, they are not carried away by these perceptions, and that's on the basis of ultimate valid cognition, that cognition that actually looks. Now, what we're going to be looking at, and yes, so I was speaking about this ultimate valid cognition in terms of the objects that we perceive, and also the mind that is the perceiver. Likewise, also there, if we analyze, we can see we have a strong sense of me, and that's, you could say, the most basic component of our experience. But if we analyze, we can also see that what we call me, for example, I talk about my body and I identify with all of it. There's a lot of different body parts. Is that all me? Because I burn my finger, I say I'm burnt. I hit my toe, I think that I'm in pain, and so forth. All these various things, they are constructed as and seen as a self. And that's why, again, if we analyze, we won't find any such unitary permanent self. It's continually shifting. Now, these are things, of course, topics that we continually operate with within the Buddhist teaching. These are the two truths. And in this context, we're talking about the knower. of these two truths, the valid cognition that sees that. But what we're going to be looking at in this chapter is how both the conventional or relative truth and the ultimate ultimate valid cognition, how these can be approached in two different ways. Particularly, it's interesting for us who, in our way of engaging with the world, and particularly for us who are then practicing sadhana and who are practicing Vajrayana, then there's an added perspective, which is what we call pure perception or sacred outlook, pure appearances, and so forth. The whole idea of purity, the whole idea of engaging a vision of the nature of appearances, not the way that appearances work, because that's the same. You know, for the Dalai Lama puts water on the boil and we put water on the boil and we both boil our waters the same way. But there's a difference between the way that this sage perceives and interacts with the phenomenal world and the way an ordinary confused individual that subscribes to this solid sense of self and other relates to the world. And that's where we actually end up, as much as we can talk about valid understanding of the phenomenal world, there's a very different understanding of the phenomenal world that applies when there's no longer confusion. And that's where we're engaging what's referred to as the pure vision, or the conventional valid cognition of pure vision. And that's not, sadly, and this is why I say this is so important, sadly there are, when we talk about pure vision or we talk about pure perception, there are sadly sort of a discourse that somehow, even though teachers again and again say this, that lead many to believe that when we're doing visualization practice in Vajrayana, that we're imagining something that's not there, that we're putting on some sort of rose-colored glasses and imagining something. And, you know, it's like, okay, I'm just going to imagine this and something will happen. You know, this sort of like, fake it till you make it. You know, let's just pretend that it's something it's not, and maybe something will happen. And that's the last thing that we do in Buddhism. In Buddhism, we analyze reality. We're looking at things how they are. We're never imagining things. That could never become a practice. If we were sitting there imagining something, how would that enable us to relate to reality? How would that prepare us to working with our mind and our phenomenal world if we're just sitting imagining something that's not there? So the natural progression of less and less confusion enables us to perceive more and more accurately the phenomenal world. And when we practice visualization, that's just aligning ourselves with phenomena, just like we gain an understanding of ultimate truth, that we understand that phenomena exist and yet they don't have a reality. Then similarly also with conventional truth, we also begin to understand that phenomena, yes, they appear, but they are in fact what we call the unity of appearance and emptiness. So this is quite significant. Anyway, I'll stick to the text now. And so this is chapter 13 in the text, and it says, conventional ultimate valid cognition, the second main section of inferential cognition is its classifications, which have a main part and a summary. So we've looked at before, oh gosh, I think it's the nature, but this again had several subdivisions, right? Now we're going to look at the classifications, and the last main section of inferential valid cognition will be refutations. But anyway, we're on the second one, sorry. So these are the classifications, and there's four, two for the relative, two for the absolute. So the text says, the main part, which we're looking at here, has two aspects, the valid cognition of conventional reality and the valid cognition that investigates ultimate reality. So I'm in here inserting something from an excellent book on Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche's teachings, and it's called Mipham and Buddha Nature, the ground of what is it again? Nyingma view on the ground or something. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, the book is called Mipham and Buddha Nature, by Douglas Duckworth. It was really one of the it's so rare to find really great academics nowadays. I mean, there are an increasing number, but this is really one outstanding academic who particularly then is incredibly conversant and familiar with the work of Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche. So he says, Mipham Rinpoche delineates two types of conventional valid cognition based on confined perception and pure vision, respectively. So that's two kinds of relative understanding of relative truth: confined perception, pure vision. Then he goes on to say, his two conventional valid cognitions are similar to his two ultimate cognitions, those that concern the categorized and uncategorized ultimate, in that the division is grounded in two distinct modes of understanding. One, a delimited conceptual mode of mind, and two, an inconceivable mode of wisdom. So this is where we, again, very often hear this confused idea that emptiness, oh, I could never understand it because it's something that needs to be experienced. That's absolutely not true. From the very start in the Buddhist teaching, there's teachings on trying to understand things. There's teachings that are pointing to us how reality is. So just like we talk about the rope and the snake, it's not like we think that one day the snake will go away or something will happen. We actually need to look at the snake, and that's where you see, oh, it's actually a rope. So there is, of course, a huge difference between having realized shunyata, being a tathagata, being someone who has seen suchness, being a sage. There's a huge difference between that and being somebody who's on the path and studying the path. But that's where on the path we identify, yes, phenomena, they are in fact dependently arisen. They consist of a conventional experience of conditioned phenomena that come together and they create appearances, but they are not inherently existing. They don't have an unchanging essence. And that's where we can see how we go wrong, because we attribute inherent essence. You know, nowadays we're all onto the media, right? So you see the face of one politician and you think bad guy. You see somebody else, you see good guy, whatever. We continually attribute solidity to our phenomena, and continually we're in situations where we have likes and dislikes constantly. So that's where we can identify how we fail to see that in fact what it is we refer to as good and bad are just a set of ever-changing web of causes and conditions. So we're not suggesting that all of a sudden we just sort of have a blah relationship to everything, like, oh yeah, it's all just one. That's not, we're in fact much more practical when we're not held back by likes and dislikes. But this insight into the emptiness nature of phenomena is something that we establish very ordinarily on the basis of rationality. So that's where we need to first look and learn. We can't just join the church and now everything's la-di-da, wonderful, and we hold hands and chant Om. No, we need to do our homework. We need to see what it is that the Buddha is wishing to impart and tell us about what we're experiencing. And that's where we need to have this understanding of emptiness. So that's where we first have, as Douglas Duckworth writes, a delimited conceptual mode of mind. That's the conceptual mind that understands emptiness. And that's what gives us faith and an understanding of why we would want to then move on to invoking a greater perspective of wisdom. And that we do on the basis of the path. But for us to effectively engage in curing our illness, we need to trust the tradition of medicine, we need to trust the process, and we need to trust that we can be cured. And that's what the first conceptual mode is about. That gives us that confidence and faith to understand what it is we're undertaking. And that then leads to the inconceivable mode of wisdom. So as you can hear, I'm quite emphatic that these are important points, and they really are. And you could say this is very much what's the theme of the work we're studying, is very much properly understanding the two truths. So here, in terms of inferential valid cognition, we're then understanding how we can infer, perhaps not see, but we can infer how there's a difference between how we can have a confined perception and a pure perception of the phenomenal world, and how we can understand absolute truth in terms of both a rational, conceptual way and an experiential way. So, there's probably some of you who are very familiar with this already, but just in case some of us aren't, just going a little bit over this and emphasizing sort of the main point. The first then, conventional valid cognition. I think we looked at this briefly last time, where it says, on the conventional level, since there are appearances that do not accord with reality, there are the way things appear. Sorry, on the conventional level, since there are appearances that do not accord with reality, there are the way things appear and the way things are, independent on impure ordinary perception or pure vision. There are two types of conventional valid cognition which resemble human eyes and divine eyes. So let's just have a look at that. The way the wording here is slightly confusing, if you ask me. So yes, so what we're first saying is that we can, on one hand, see things that are not in accord with reality, and that's when we fail to see the emptiness nature of things. That's when we as we do, obviously, we fail to see that form is emptiness and so forth. We fail to see that appearance are emptiness. So that's where we right now, as ordinary beings, we actually have perceptions that are not in accord with reality. We are not seeing clearly. Then, so that's where you have two ways of seeing. Well, there are two ways that you can say phenomena. There's the way that they appear and the way that they are. So you have perceptions, you have ordinary appearances, and then you have their emptiness nature, that they don't possess reality. So on the basis of seeing that or not seeing it, we then have, on one hand, what we call impure ordinary perception, and then that's when we see things. We see things how they appear, but we fail to see how things actually are. So that's where we would say that the way that things appear and the way things are not in harmony. They're not congruent. They're not. What's the word? Basically, we're simply not seeing things in. There's some terms I'm lacking here. I apologize. I'll try to find. There are proper translations. We would say the way that things appear and the way things are in harmony. That's what happens with the sage. In the case of us, the way things appear and the way things are not in harmony. And so we end up having, on one hand, we have then the sage and the ordinary being. The ordinary being has impure ordinary perception, and the sage has pure vision, simply just seeing things as they are, or rather seeing the perceptions in harmony with the way they are. And as such, the sage and we go through the same room, we see the same things. But so the way that things are, they are, you could say, how we perceive them. But the difference is that we, in our engagement with our phenomenal world, we're seeing things in terms of what we like and dislike. The sage is not naive and understands that this is all simply just a display of dependent arising, a web of causes and conditions. And so for the sage, the perceptions and the way that these things actually are is in harmony. So that's where we have pure vision. And so that's where then Mipham Rinpoche says, in dependence on pure and ordinary perception or pure vision, there are two types of conventional cognition, which resemble human eyes and divine eyes. Again, this is an example that's a little bit image that's a little bit sort of distant from our culture, because we have sort of a little bit sort of the hippie idea of the third eye, right? The third eye. I don't know if anyone ever came across a guy called Lobsang Rampa, but it was a sort of far-fetched fantasy about Tibet where you could get this third eye operated in. And of course, we do see deities represented with the divine eye, and sometimes also in the hands and on the feet and so on. So, for example, in the case of the White Tara or the Vajrayana and so forth, we do see deities with three eyes. And that's where this implies that there's no longer obscuration. So that's where, as far as in the world view of Indians and Tibetans, then that's just plain old knowledge that there are those who just see things with what we call the flesh eye, the human eye, and those that see with divine eyes. So that corresponds to what we're talking about here, which is then the two types of conventional valid cognition. Simply seeing clearly and not seeing clearly. So that's where Mipham says these two have their own features and are categorized by their natures, causes, effects, and functions. So we have then, there's a bit to be said about this, and this is going to be applied also when we look at the ultimate valid cognition. But basically here we're simply just saying there's two ways we relate to our phenomena, clearly and confused. So the commentary here by Khenpo Palden Sherab says, the conventional relative truth appears differently depending on whether the way things appear accords with the way they truly are. There are definitely two levels of conventional valid cognition, in that the relative truth is comprehended as either impure or pure. Impure conventional valid cognition is the ordinary confined perception of worldly people, and pure conventional valid cognition is based on the vision of sublime beings. Examples of these two are human eyes, which merely sees the objects on their own level, and divine eyes, which sees the human objects as well as their own objects. So that's where the divine eyes see far more. So in fact, what we have here corresponds to a science that is focused on how things are in the ordinary world, and that's very valid. And then a science that goes far beyond that. That is the science when the observer, the subject, is no longer deluded and sees far more. And we can see how in the sutras, and particularly if you look in the Mahayana sutras, there's continually reference to an incredible vision that extends far beyond what we ordinarily perceive. You look at the Flower Ornament Sutra, you look at the Vimalakirti Sutra, and so on. Continually in the Mahayana, there's expositions of the reality as experienced by the Bodhisattvas, the sublime beings. And particularly in the Vimalakirti Sutra, in the first chapter, then it talks about how the god Brahma Sikhin perceives the world completely pure, and he has a discussion with Shariputra, who says, no, the world is a place of suffering. And Shariputra is sort of associated with the scientific person who's very sort of clear on what he sees, a no-nonsense person. And he's very much, you could say, governed by his prajna, his sort of, you could say, analytical mind. And so he completely disagrees with Brahma Sikhin, and they just go to the Buddha, and the Buddha actually introduces to Shariputra how the Buddha sees the world, which is in accordance with how Brahmasikin, the God, also sees it. Because the God, Brahmasikin, being at a higher level in samsara, we're still talking relative truth, of course, we're not somebody who's enlightened, but still within that relative perception. Brahmasikin sees the world with a very different view from the confined view of Shariputra. And so that's where the approach to, for example, the Four Noble Truths and so on is very different. The Brahmasikin doesn't see really everything in terms of suffering, even though the nature, of course, of samsara is conditioned, then Brahmasikin has a much less, you could say, is much less confined. So that's where there's a much more valid understanding, the less there's obscurations. So that's where the perceptions that we talk about here are much more accurate. So a sage sees things much clearer. That we can also see in the ordinary world. If you're going to hire a lawyer, you would want to have one that is much less, you could say, whose mind is much less toxic, who's much clearer. We can also see within ourselves how the difference in when we're clear and when we're not. And the perceptions that we have on the days when we're paranoid and angry and grumpy, and the perception we have on days where we're rested and open-minded. So all in all, we can see how reality is very much linked up with the observer. And that's where we take that to the nth degree, where there's an insight into the suchness nature of things, then the perceptions of relative truth also is very different. So this is then what we then talk about as the valid cognition of pure perception. So then here it says 44, a mind that is unmistaken about ordinary facts arises from having correctly apprehended its objects. Valid ordinary perception eliminates misunderstandings about objects and fully apprehends the fact of the situation. And this exactly defines how our ordinary science operates. And this, incidentally, also, if you've studied Dhammakirti and Pramana, this is also how Dhammakirti, and we in general, in the Buddhist teaching, understand valid cognition. It's what we call a confined valid cognition, or what Mipham Rinpoche refers to, a confined valid cognition, because it's completely valid. Again, it is what you need in order to pay your rent and to drive in the traffic and to operate the world that you're living in, navigating the world. Yes, and that's where it's very helpful to have a science that understands that. And so we have remarkable science nowadays, but entirely a science that is operated around, you know, the mechanical, the material, very sophisticated science behind this thing, but at the same time, entirely, you could say, stuck within a dualistic perception. So that's where then, in terms of there's going to be 4 ways we can understand that. It says each type of valid cognition. So there's the conventional, and also the ultimate, has 4 distinguishing features by which it is categorized: its nature, cause, effect, and function. First, for conventional valid cognition of impure ordinary perception, 1, its nature is a mind that is unmistaken about the mere facts of its objects, which is an ordinary object in a particular context. So that's the nature. That's simply what we would understand as science in the general sense. It's simply just understanding the object, understanding how metals work, understanding, you could say, chemicals and chemical reactions, understanding aspects of information technology, aspects of medicine, and so forth. So that's where we have a valid cognition, or rather a mind that knows. There's a subject there that knows how things work, ordinary objects in a particular context. And it also extends then to, in relation to its cause. The valid cognition arises from correctly apprehending the real way a functional thing is within a particular context. So that's again where you have the observer, the scientist, if you like, that knows where things come from and how they, and has a proper understanding of how they in this case, the functional thing operates within a particular context. 3, also then such a valid cognition or knower knows its function, which it says 3, its function is to clear away misunderstandings connected with the ordinary perception of objects. And that's where then it also enables us to, for example, not mistake titanium for lead. You know, we might say there's an appearance of something that's a metal, but we might think, oh, this is something that can be used for building bridges, and then in fact it's not. And so that's where we can, that kind of insight of valid cognition enables us to not be deceived by appearances. So that's where we can understand what things are and what they aren't. And then its effect is that it fully and unerringly apprehends the relevant facts. So that's where there's a complete understanding of the facts around a given phenomena. All of this is quite simply just the way that we validly understand the ordinary world. So that's how an ordinary valid cognition, you could say a good scientist, all of this, a good scientist has all of this covered in terms of correctly understanding this, the object, that the field of the particular science. So it can be, like I say, medicine, it can be engineering, it can be information technology, but these 4 aspects are present within a understanding of what we could call a confined, conventional, valid cognizer, a scientist who properly understands his or her field. Now we're looking at then the conventional valid cognition that's based on pure vision. And here Mipham Rinpoche says, limitless, timeless awareness arises from seeing suchness just as it is. It eliminates misunderstandings about its objects, which are inconceivable, and results in knowing the entire extent of phenomena. So what we're talking about here is the primordial wisdom that sees emptiness, if you like, suchness. And all across the Mahayana, this is what the scope is. This is what brings enlightenment, seeing suchness, seeing things as they are. And when this awareness is no longer deluded, seeing reality as it is, then there's no longer this conflict between the way things are, the way things appear and the way that they are. There's an understanding that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. And that's where then at that point, then the Buddha, the sage, the Bodhisattva, the Vajrayana, the Dakini, and so forth, the individual is properly understanding the object, and this knows the nature of phenomena as they actually exist, as they truly are. So it says here, second, the distinguishing feature of conventional valid cognition based on pure vision are that, so this is the knower, its nature is the timeless awareness that is unmistaken about its objects, limitless phenomena. So that's simply just how a sage relates to the limitless phenomena through understanding their true nature. 2, as for its cause, it arises from, this kind of valid insight arises from unmistaken seeing within the meditative equipoise of unfabricated suchness, just as it is. So an ordinary sentient being doesn't experience that. What an ordinary sentient being needs to do is engage in the path. And it's on the basis of engaging in the path and settling into meditative equipoise that then is seeing this unfabricated suchness. So that's why we, all of us who are practitioners of the Dharma, we practice meditation so that we will be able to see as we're meditating, then not get caught up in the perceptions, but understand this, the unfabricated suchness phenomena as they truly are. 3, its function is to eliminate misunderstanding about its objects, which is inconceivable for the mind of ordinary perception. And that's where the practice of the path, and particularly here, the practice of meditative equipoise, meditation, the function is to eliminate that confusion that fails to see phenomena as they are. And 4, its effect is the timeless awareness that knows everything that can be known. So that's where, when there's no longer obscuration, then mind is no longer held in ignorance, then there's the knowing of what can be known. So that's where we talk about awakening or omniscience, knowing what can be known. In this way, so Khenpo Palden Sherpa says, pure conventional valid cognition is the actual wisdom mind of Buddha's 3 kayas. Now we come across the mention of the 3 kayas again and again. And again, when we talk about the 3 kayas, we're talking about the scope of wisdom. From the scope or the experience of wisdom, then all of phenomena abides within the experience of the 3 kayas. There's the non-delusion, which is the Dhammakaya, the qualities, all the countless qualities that arise within that lack of delusion, and all the phenomena that appear, all of which then are seen in terms of the Niyamanakaya. So we have the lack of delusion, Dhammakaya, the qualities that arise, Sambhogakaya, and all the perceptions, Niyamanakaya, but they never extend or they never move from the realm of reality, the realm of suchness. And this is then experienced by this pure conventional valid cognition. This is an important point, which is not always, not all traditions actually expound, or what's it called? Not all traditions present the purity in the same way. In some traditions, there is the idea, oh yeah, we think of ourselves as deity, we think of the world as deity, and that enables us to then engage in a greater way with the path. But this way of understanding, this pure vision, is rather particular to the tradition that we have then, that we refer to as the ancient translations of the Nyingma tradition. So that's also the title of this book, is Valid Cognition According to the Nyingma. So here, this approach is the foundation for understanding particularly this valid the conventional valid cognition. That's quite particular. Most traditions actually, or other traditions, they simply stay with pramana or valid cognition according to Dhammakirti, where it really just operates with a confined vision based on the ordinary mind. Here we talk about including within valid cognition the scope of an unconfused knower, or the valid cognition that is unobscured. So this is particular then to this approach. So this is something we have in the from the time of Shantarakshita down through Rongsun Pandita, Longchenpa, and also Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche. Khenpo Palden Sherpa says here, it is the profound instructions. What we've been talking about here is the profound instructions of the Vijayadhara Lamas of the 3 lineages. That's the wisdom lineage, the sign lineage, and the whispered lineage. So that's the particular lineages that the Nyingma teachings, they come down, sort of transmitted. For example, in the Kagyu tradition, you would talk about the what is it again, the four transmissions that come down from the Buddha's Vajradhara to Tilopa, Naropa, and so on. In the Nyingma tradition, we talk about the three lineages, which is the wisdom lineage that comes from the Buddha Samantabhadra to the Sambhogakaya Vajrasattva, and then you have the sign lineage that then goes down to the Vidyadharas, such as from Vajrasattva to Garabdorje, Manjushri Mitra, Sri Singha, and so on. These are the sign lineage of great Vidyadharas, and then you have the whispered oral lineage, or the sort of the instructions to great individuals, which are actually spoken words then, and this is then the kind of transmission that took place when these were passed on down to the students of, say, Padmasambhava. And also these are the teachings that reach us. But we talk about these three lineages then, the wisdom lineage, the sign lineage, and the spoken lineage or whispered lineage. So Khenpo Palden Sherpa goes on to say, it is the key instructions of the lords of the three families, Khenpo Shantarakshita, Lopen Padmasambhava, and the Dharma King Trisong Detsen. This is the core of the practice of the innumerable learned and accomplished Vidyadharas of the early translation tradition. It is the third eye that sees very hidden phenomena, the profound meaning of the sutras, tantras, and shastras. This is the understanding of the true meaning that was revitalized in Tibet by Jamyang Lama Mipham Rinpoche. So this is quite significant. Like I said, this approach to understanding relative perceptions in terms of both a conventional relative perception and a pure vision is something that is taught by Shantarakshita and Longchenpa and so on, but it was particularly Mipham Rinpoche, who in the 19th century, at the request actually of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, really revitalized this way of understanding. Basically revitalized. Khyentse Wangpo asked Mipham Rinpoche, please write something that reminds everyone what it is that we have in the Nyingma tradition, because somehow it had been lost. And there's this, like they would say, the Nyingma teachings were a bit like just a painting of a lamp. That it was, it represented a lamp, but it didn't actually give out any light. If you have a painting of a lamp, a butter lamp, which you often have on the walls of the monasteries. So that's where the work that Mipham Rinpoche undertook was on the basis of Khyentse Wangpo's request, because Khyentse Wangpo saw this as being danger of being lost. So Khenpo Palden Sherpa says, there are two valid cognitions that investigate conventional truth. The impure conventional valid cognition of ordinary perception, and the pure conventional cognition that is the vision of sublime beings. This classification is found only in the early translation tradition. So of course, this is not to say, well, the early translations, they're very this, that, and the other. It's more just to appreciate that this insight has been lost, and it's really important that it becomes part of the vision that with which we engage in the Vajra, the way that we engage the understanding of the Vajrayana vision of pure perception. So this is very auspicious that we could discuss this today, since it's Guru Rinpoche Day, and some of us will be practicing doing feast practice, and so this is where we can, you could say, revitalize, or how do you say, recommit. Gosh, the words are failing me, but we can bring forth in our mind once again, with great clarity, the valid point about this pure perception. So, so if there's any questions you have about this, please go ahead. I don't know if I can answer questions, but we can have some discussion, I guess. Yes. What does sign refer to in sign lineage? It could really just be a gesture, but I would say, as I've heard it, it sometimes is in fact just very few words. So it could be just simply just a particular sign or a gesture, or seeing the movement of the teacher. But it could also, I think, be just very few sort of words. The what we have nowadays, of course, is a rather extensive tradition of a lot of, not a lot, but of instructions with ordinary words, whereas in the case of the early Vajradharas, simply just a few words, but possibly also sign. But it's a sort of a gesture. But that's just, I'm actually just speaking here from my impression of the way that I've, you read in the history how the teachings have been transmitted. But it's something that we could maybe ask some authority on this matter at one point. I'd be also curious. Yeah, the next question is also about that. When we say whispered, the oral lineage, and that's oral as in AURL, which is then basically what has been heard. Nyenju in Tibetan, the hearing lineage. So you have the signs, which are then, you could say, very unelaborate ways of communicating. Initially, you have the wisdom, the wisdom lineage, where we would say the Buddha Samantabhadra communicates this wisdom to Vajrasattva, without any other, you could say, means than simply just mind to mind. Let's put it that way. But that's where then the more gross or more sort of conspicuous aspect is then when we have signs. So that's the second lineage. And then you have finally the hearing lineage, or the whispered lineage. So this is just ways in which we identify how, according to the needs of beings at various levels, communication takes place. So at the time of the very original level of wisdom, then you could say the Dharmakaya level, then this is something that's just communicated through wisdom, through simply just mind to mind. Then we talk about the sign lineage, which is then for very, you could say, sophisticated, sensitive students, the likes of Garab Dorje and Manjushri Mitra, Sising, and so on. And then to us, who then would need some words and some guidance. So these are the three lineages. Yeah. I'd always refer to Tugu Tundrup, the masters of meditation and miracles, and also Nyushi Kenrin, which is garland of rare and precious gems. Mind you, to sort of render this into a modern vernacular and sort of probably a bit more easy to relate to, probably Chögyam Trungpa somewhere must have talked about this. I'm wondering if the three lineages are discussed somewhere in Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's Vajrayana teaching. It would be, actually. Okay, everything else clear in terms of the difference between the conventional valid cognition that's based on the ordinary mind and the conventional valid cognition based on wisdom. So you could say the ordinary conventional is based on the dualistic mind. The conventional, the valid cognition based on, or the valid cognition of pure perception, pure vision, is based on wisdom. So the mind that's not held by dualistic confusion. So like I say, this is very helpful when we come across the entire culture and the entire teaching of the Vajrayana. And that when we're practicing Vajrayana, we're essentially engaging with a wider perspective on our perceptions. So, for example, this is where we understand suchness does not imply that all of a sudden there's nothing there, but it does imply that we have a non-dual experience, the experience of wisdom in terms of relating to the perceptions. And that's where then it makes sense, then the Vajrayana path of carrying perceptions as inseparable from emptiness. And it's then through the practice of sadhana, yoga, and specifically also then the non-conceptual practices of Mahamudra and Dzogchen that this vision is fully engaged. Someone say they like the painting behind me. Yes, a stairway to, I guess this is very, we can interpret this as being sort of the nature of our path, the stairway that leads up to great space, I guess. That's right. It's raining a lot here. I don't know if you can hear it. Raindrops on the windows. Yeah, right now I'm staying at some friends up in the Blue Mountains. So it's a little bit cool, a little bit cloudy, rainy. Okay, well, I'd very much encourage you all to sort of to sort of go over this chapter here. And like I said, this is something that so often there's so much confusion around when people encounter the Vajrayana path, not only as you could say observers, but even practitioners. I've heard practitioners who sort of refer to the development stage practice as something that's sort of just like, you know, we kind of let's believe this, you know. So this is where we are not, we in Buddhism we don't engage in, you could say, beliefs. We're into looking and seeing clearer, and that's where this perception of pure perception is seeing clearly. Also, for example, otherwise the implication would be that if we read the sort of sutras where it implies how, you know, within every dust mote there's countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and when we, as it is explained in the Flower Ornament Sutra, the sort of the ornamentation and the experience of the Bodhisattva, that would, if that was just imagination, then they would be completely deluded. Then the bodhisattvas and those with pure visions, they'd be completely lost and basically useless in guiding sentient beings, because they'd be off on some, you know, hallucination about phenomena. So all of this pure vision is about phenomena seeing clearly. Phenomena seen clearly. Yeah. Okay. I guess we'll conclude if there's no more questions. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. by this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.